Good morning. You're watching All You Need to Know on BloombergQuint Live, and I'm Alex Matthew. First, the headlines. Asian markets begin the trading day with modest gains as flip-flops over trade negotiations between the US and China continue. US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi sends the legislation supporting Hong Kong protesters to President Donald Trump. Trump is expected to sign the bill despite China's warnings of retaliation. The US government has approved the sale of naval guns worth $1 billion to India. This is the biggest defense deal in several years, that is 4 years. And CSB Bank's 410 crore IPO opens for subscription today. The price band has been set at 193 to 195 rupees per share. And finally, the government is looking to sell 15% stake in rights at a floor price of 293.5 rupees per share. Today, it looks to raise 1,100 crore rupees from the sale. All right, let's talk about the U.S. markets now. It was another small day of small moves for the U.S. markets. The benchmark indices continue to retreat from their record highs. The S&P 500 fell for the third day, the longest streak in 2 months. However, the benchmarks remained 1% near their record high levels. Ritika Gupta of Bloomberg News tells you what transpired in that session on Wall Street.
US stocks ended lower on Thursday as we continue to retreat from record stock market highs. The S&P 500, Dow Industrial and Nasdaq all ended down about 0.2%. For the S&P 500, it's the third straight day of losses and its longest losing streak in almost 2 months. But we are, of course, still within 1% of a record high. Now, for the market, the overhang continues to be trade tensions between the US and China. China's chief trade negotiator saying he's cautiously optimistic about a deal, but tension still remains about the US bill supporting the Hong Kong protests. Now, if we look at the S&P 500 sector composition, we can see it was a risk-off Thursday with 8 out of the 11 sectors ending down on Thursday. At the bottom, we had some of those defensive sectors, healthcare, utilities and real estate, perhaps as yields rose for the first time in a week. We also had the tech sector lower, led by some of those semiconductors. Now, at the top was the energy sector, the oil companies gaining along with oil, which was up around 2.5% by the end of the session. In corporate news, Charles Schwab is in talks to buy its rival TD Ameritrade. Schwab was the second best performer in the S&P 500. Its stock was up around 7% by the end of the session. TD Ameritrade was also up around 17%. But this threat of a merger weighed on competitor E-Trade, which was the worst performer in the S&P on Thursday. Now, elsewhere, Tiffany stock rose almost 3%, and that was on news of LVMH's sweetened offer for the company at $130 a share. That's your US Thursday markets wrap. I'm Ritika Gupta in New York with Bloomberg TV.
All right, turning to the Asia-Pacific region, let's have a look at how those stocks are doing. Rosalind Chin is joining me now to tell you all about those markets. Good morning, Rosalind. How are we looking at the start of trade?
Good morning. Well, actually, things had been a little bit muted earlier in the session, but now with the opening of Hong Kong and the Chinese markets, we do see a bit of a firmer direction coming into play, and that direction does look like it's going into the green. We've got the MSCI Asia Pacific Index now making gains of 0.4%. The Nikkei is up 0.7%, Topix up by 0.5%, Kospi up by 0.4%, Hang Seng opened higher, they're up by nearly 0.2%. Shanghai Composite opened higher as well, up by 0.1%. Now, you know, one of the key issues that investors have been asking really is which way are those trade winds blowing? Will a deal be signed or not? We've had a bit more movement on that with reports that the Chinese Vice Premier and the Chief Negotiator Liu He has invited Robert Lighthizer for more talks later this month in Beijing. We've got, of course, that deadline, the December 15th deadline for additional US tariffs to be imposed. That is what many investors will be looking at. Offshore yuan has started to price in the risk that that actually may go ahead. The increases in tariffs may go ahead on that date, or perhaps a decision will be left until the very last minute. Right now, we can look at some of the currencies. Offshore yen at 7.29. We've got the Japanese yen at 108.67, and very quickly the Aussie dollar is at 0.68. So taking a quick look at Japanese data, we did have some inflation numbers out today showing that really there have been very slight gains only in CPI and consumer prices, despite that tax hike earlier in October, on the 1st of October, when those kicked in. And we saw that consumer prices, excluding fresh food, rose 0.4% in October from a year earlier. We also had some PMI numbers, Jibun Bank PMI index rising to 48.6 from 48.4 in October, so very slight improvement there. Compare that to a year ago, though, when the number was 52.2. Australia is still really feeling some of the impact from the fallout from the Westpac issue. Westpac Banking losing by about 1% right now. The Westpac board is to meet today to discuss these regulator AUSTRAC claims that there was money laundering and terrorism financing laws breached by the bank. Westpac has been suffering the fallout from that for the last couple of days, but the broader market S&P ASX 200 is making gains, up by 0.75%. So looks like many of the markets now moving into positive territory. Back to you.
Thanks so much for that, Rosalind. All right, I do want to talk a little bit more about the trade tensions between the US and China that Rosalind mentioned. In fact, she did say that China has invited the US for more talks in this month itself, and they've said that they're cautiously optimistic. But at the same time, you have a situation where President Trump has been sent legislation with regard to Hong Kong, and that is expected to be signed very soon in support of Hong Kong's protesters, that is. And that remains a key overhang on any deal that might take place. Tom McKenzie of Bloomberg News brings you more details.
The bill now is likely to be on President Trump's desk this week. He's said and indicated he's prepared to sign off on it. And as you rightly point out, the Chinese have said we are going to retaliate with strong countermeasures. They haven't detailed exactly what those are. Now, they may wait until they get to this review process in the US, this annual review, to check on the trading status before they actually initiate any retaliation. Of course, we've seen in other examples where the US has aggravated China on issues like Taiwan, supplying them with military aid or blocking some of their companies that are involved in Xinjiang, the surveillance state there, or blacklisting Huawei. China's come out very strongly rhetorically and said we're going to hit back, and then nothing came of that, because of course their focus is on trying to secure this phase one trade deal for all the economic data reasons we know about. So let's see what happens on the retaliatory front. We shouldn't probably expect anything imminently, but we never know. This is a territorial integrity issue for China. It is incredibly sensitive. On the trade front, of course, we've heard from the Commerce Ministry officials saying that they are going to continue communications. They're going to continue to work with their US counterparts towards that phase one deal. And as you say, it follows from Liu He saying he's cautiously optimistic.
I was going to go there. Tom, what does cautiously optimistic even mean now at this point in time?
Well, right, they're wrangling over issues still, we believe, on the quantity and the time frame for agricultural purchases, which again, as you've both discussed, is expected to be the easy part. Exactly. And we still don't have any clarity on whether or not they've actually come to an agreement even on that issue. And then, of course, there is the crucial issue for China, which is the pace at which some of these tariffs can be rolled back. We know they're still discussing the rate and the time frame for that as well. Again, still waiting for clarity on that. And even Liu He himself said to some of our sources that he was, quote unquote, confused about some of these US demands. Earlier in the week, of course, we heard Trump saying, look, China isn't stepping up to the level I would like to see them at. So again, maybe that's playing leverage from Trump's perspective. But again, we still haven't got some clarity on Trump on exactly how he feels about how negotiations have processed so far.
And then from the Chinese perspective, there's also the issue of Hong Kong, and that is likely to act as a spanner in the trade talks between the US and China. The city is set to hold district council elections on Sunday. However, whether polling will take place or not amidst the 5-month-long protests remains under question. Ian Marlowe of Bloomberg News brings you more.
There's been 5 months of protests in the city, and that has really focused attention on these elections. The protest began with opposition to an extradition bill that was proposed here, but have gradually morphed into a call for greater democratic accountability in the city and demands for universal suffrage. So given this is the first vote, and given that district council elections, being very low-level elections, are actually a more direct form of democracy in the city than the city's more powerful legislative council elections, which set aside some seats for businessmen and other things like that. It's become a bit of a focal point for protesters and the pro-democracy politicians here in the city. We're expecting pro-democracy lawmakers to make some gains based on the momentum of the protest movement. It's not always clear exactly who is allied with who. There's about 452 elected positions. Some people haven't declared exactly who they're with. Pro-democracy lawmakers are sort of circulating a list that's saying who's allied with them. So we're expecting those people to make gains, and that might mean that they will wield more influence in appointing lawmakers appointing people who make up this committee that chooses the chief executive of Hong Kong. So it could potentially have some impact down the line.
And amidst all of that, the impeachment inquiry into U.S. President Donald Trump rumbles on following another day of hearings on Capitol Hill. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy has called the inquiry against Trump a hit job. Derek Wallbank of Bloomberg News brings you more details.
Well, the hearings have now wrapped up in the House Impeachment Committee. We're looking forward to what's going to happen next. And what's going to happen next is that lawmakers are going to have to make a decision, Democratic lawmakers, on sort of how they proceed here. They've gotten a lot of second-hand witnesses, but they haven't been able to get some of the first-hand people that they've wanted. The White House has said that they're not going to provide them, and the State Department has said they're not going to provide them. So Democrats really do have a choice here. Do they sort of move forward without them, or do they wait on the courts to rule on what they can do? And it looks like right now the Democrats are going to move ahead regardless. That puts a possible vote on moving forward on the impeachment in sometime before Christmas, in that sort of window, and so it looks like this is going to proceed ahead. Now, testimony did wrapped in somewhat dramatic fashion, but it's really clear, I think, from watching this and watching the reaction, that Republicans and Democrats are living in two different realities when it comes to the impeachment process. I mean, you looked at the front page of the Washington Post that said that diplomat acknowledges quid pro quo, and Kevin McCarthy, who you just referenced, said there was no quid pro quo. I mean, they both can't be right, but they both are sort of living, as I say, kind of in parallel right now. So it's very clear that even though some of this testimony may have been quite dramatic, may have laid out things, as Democrats say, in a very plain and clear fashion, it's also not making much of a difference or an impact among the views of Republicans. And as this goes forward, remember, impeachment is both a legal and a political process. The next stage, once the House clears this, is to go into the Republican-held Senate for adjudication.
Derek, in the meantime, has public opinion shifted at all?
Not really. Public opinion has been remarkably resilient on this. Now, Democrats have gotten a little bit more clarity on the public opinion front. This has not been, I think there was some concern among Democrats that this was going to be a little bit of a risk to them. There really has not been any great amount of risk. It's sort of, the impeachment polling has kind of tracked President Trump's approval ratings here, and the country is fairly divided on impeachment, with narrow edges towards saying that the process is going forward in a sort of fair way. So you have seen this kind of track along the entrenched political rails. Right now, the United States is a very deeply divided country on impeachment, on President Trump, on a whole lot of political issues, and this is kind of falling within those tracks rather than carving new ones.
All right. Let's talk about what else is making headlines across the globe. Sue Keenan of Bloomberg News brings you the first word headlines.
We're going to start with President Trump. He has signed a 4-week spending bill that puts off a possible government shutdown, at least until December 20th. The Senate cleared the measure earlier in a 74-20 vote. This is after it had passed the House. The stopgap measure became necessary because Congress again failed to complete action on the 12 annual spending bills that were needed to keep agencies operating by the October 1st start of the fiscal year. Now, the former governor of the People's Bank of China says policymakers still have room to act, providing monetary and fiscal work in union. Zhou Xiaoshan has, or I should say was speaking at the New Economy Forum in Beijing amid continuing debate about how the government will handle China's widening slowdown. Shan's comments underlined the central bank's concern about letting borrowing costs fall too much.
We can still try to avoid to getting very soon into the negative interest rate area. If we could successfully manage that's the macroeconomic control in this regard, then we don't need to consider that much of unconventional monetary policy.
And finally, to Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is to face trial for corruption. He has been charged with bribery, fraud, and breach of trust in a move that could halt his career. Netanyahu is the first sitting Israeli leader to be indicted, as the Justice Ministry painted a picture of a politician who abused his position and sacrificed the integrity of his office. Netanyahu says the investigation is tainted and, in his words, did not pursue the truth. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok, on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Sue Keenan. This is Bloomberg.
All right, let's turn to India now, and Agam Vakil is here to set you up for the day's trade and also to tell you what's happening in the futures and options space. Good morning, Agam. Well, looking at the end of the week, how are we looking to end?
Yes, hopefully a better end than what we've seen with the kind of volatility that we've seen in the markets at this point in time. But let's start by taking a look at the SGX Nifty, indicating a flat opening. For now, at least, but a lot can change within the next couple of hours. Let's see how Indian markets have done yesterday, what they've done actually. So we saw a little bit of weakness coming through. Nifty snapping a two-day gaining streak. We saw a much more weakness in the broader market indices. And coming down to your banking indices again, well, the picture isn't very different. We had some support from private sector banks. But moving on to ADRs, we do have some amount of weakness in Tata Motors and Vedanta. On the other hand, ICICI Bank advancing. And 3% decline for Wipro. Do remember, we also have a downgrade, a brokerage downgrade on Wipro this morning. But moving on, let's talk about fund flows. The number 5,000 crores seems like a big one, but we must remember that this is on account of the block deals that were carried out by Zee Entertainment, which is why this number does look big. If you remove the Zee Entertainment number, I'm sure the number will be much smaller. That said, DIs sold to the tune of 248 crores, so that's the other aspect that we are going to keep an eye on. But when it comes to a handful of other stocks, we are keeping an eye on HDFC Bank, Zee Entertainment, ICICI Bank. As I was suggesting, it was essentially the private sector banks which kept the banking index higher. On the other hand, a lot of pressure from ITC, Reliance Industries, and BPCL. Let's move on and talk about futures and options. And again, we're seeing further unwinding as far as Nifty futures. The Nifty banking futures too, looking at a decline around 2.5%. So unwinding coming through, a lot of positions being settled on account of potentially some amount of uncertainty with respect to the direction in the markets. But the 12,000 call is the one with the maximum open interest. Continue to see a lot of resistance there. In terms of changes in open interest, I reckon that we saw a lot of unwinding in puts. The 12,000 put did see unwinding, and the 12,000 call saw more writing coming through. Let's talk about your wicks that came off further, now below the mark of 15. Well, so some comfort for those who are long in the market. And as far as the put call ratio is concerned, it came off, but not substantially, to around 1.52 from 1.58. In terms of stocks, we're watching for Castrol India, Sun TV, Zee Entertainment once again be in focus, potentially a little more towards the kind of strength that we've seen of late. And in terms of stocks which are seeing unwinding, watching out for something like an NCC or UPL. UPL is a very interesting one. A lot of gyration too within a very large range, so we'll be watching out for that. On the whole, again, Alex, it'll all be about stocks specifically.
Absolutely. In fact, that's what we're going to talk about. Thanks so much for that, Agam. We're going to talk straight with Somit Sarkar about the stocks in news. These are the stocks that are likely to be in focus today. Somit, good morning. What's on your list today?
Good morning, Alex. I'll start off with Z Entertainment because we have a list of buyers of yesterday's block deal. Firstly, Government of Singapore, which bought nearly 3% stake. Then there's Societe Generale, which bought 1.7% stake. SBI Mutual Fund close to 0.9%. Invesco, which bought 0.86%. And then there is BlackRock, small cap world fund, Norges Bank, HSBC, Key Square, and Fidelity, which bought stake in around 0.6 to 0.84% in Z Entertainment in yesterday's block deal. Rights will also be in focus because the government is looking to sell 15% of the stake, which is valued at close to 1,100 crore rupees by an offer for sale. Now, the offer for sale will start on November 22nd and will also continue on November 25th. BHEL will also remain in focus because CRISIL has downgraded its rating on the long-term bank facilities of BHEL to AA from a AA plus rating. Also, the outlook has been revised from negative to stable due to company's weaker than expected operating performance. Laurus Labs, they have received 3 observations on the pre-approval inspection for an API manufactured unit at 2 of its units in Visakhapatnam by US FDA. Bajaj Holdings and Investment and RBL Bank will also be in focus because Bajaj Holding has clarified that they haven't taken any decision on any investments in RBL Bank. Another stock that would remain in focus on the back of a bulk deal, that is Deshman Carbogen. Now, Birla Sun Life Equity Fund has acquired nearly 12 lakh shares in the company, while the government pension fund was the seller. Lastly, a couple of Max stocks that would remain in focus because of pledge share details that has come in. Firstly, Max India, where the promoter has released pledge on 3 lakh shares, and secondly, Max Financial Services, where the promoter has revoked pledge on nearly 6.8 lakh shares on November 19th and November 20th.
All right, thanks so much for that, Somit. Now, those are the stocks that you have to watch out for in trade today, and I'm sure that you're going to watch them very closely, but I'm sure a lot of you are also going to be watching cricket today. It's the first match at Eden Gardens after Dada became BCCI president. The Bangladesh Prime Minister has flown in specially to be at the ground when the first ball is bowled today. But what's possibly going to grab more eyeballs than the personalities present on and off the field is the fluorescent pink ball. It's been designed to stand out under the floodlights as it's the first day and night international test match being played in India. Hormuz Fatakia, who is the resident cricket expert and also the producer of this show, has done some research on the pink ball. Here's what he found.
After playing for over 9 decades of its test match history with the red ball, Team India will be playing its first ever day and night test match starting Friday at the iconic Eden Gardens with this ball. No, not this one, but the pink ball. It is also the first time that Sansparil Greenlands, or SG as it is popularly known as, will be making this ball. SG joins the ranks of Dukes and Kookaburra, who have earlier manufactured pink balls. So why pink? And what are the challenges of manufacturing this ball? We spoke to SG's marketing director, Paras Anand.
You have to ensure that the pink color should last for 80 overs. I think that is one of the biggest challenges. Other than that, our focus, our R&D, even the play test or all the tests that we've done have revolved around the pink color, the retention of the pink color. So that was one area, where we had to really work very hard last few years.
NSG will be hoping that their research has been spot on. The pink ball has had its fair share of controversies, with purists not approving of the fluorescent color. The ball has gotten scruffed up before the 80 overs that it is supposed to last, and the biggest problem has been that colorblind players have found it difficult to spot the ball under lights.
It's like a trial and error method, where we were doing the process in a particular way and then we changed it based on the results. It's a technology which has evolved over years, where we were trying various combinations, whether we would start with the dyed leather, then maybe pigment on the leather, then curing it, then another layer, whether we would do 2 layers or 3 layers of coat. So it's a trial and error method, and the results that we have seen of all the changes that we have incorporated in the process have been pretty impressive. Like, we are very happy with what we have achieved so far.
A lot will also depend on the pitch curators at Eden Gardens, a pitch that typically has grass cover to hold the 22 yards together for 5 long days.
So they know the amount of grass that is needed, so that will be critical, for ensuring that the ball doesn't get scuffed up too quickly. And besides that, if the outfield is is a lush green outfield, that will also help. So these are two things which are also as important as the process that we've done on the ball. So if these things are there in place, then we are very confident that the pigment or the coloring that we've done would retain for 80 overs.
As SG takes up the challenge of manufacturing the pink ball for India's first ever day and night test match, let's see how the action unravels on the 22nd of November.
All right, let us know what you think about the pink ball in the comments section and on any one of our social media platforms. Meanwhile, let me take you through some of the stories that you'll find on the website BloombergQuint.com if you take a look as of now. First, former Reserve Bank of India Governor C. Rangarajan has said India's target of reaching $5 trillion of GDP by 2025 is simply out of the question. The Indian economy, its growth, of course, has been slowing steadily, and the reading in the second quarter of the current fiscal is expected to be worse than the 5% growth registered in the first quarter. The US government has approved the sale of 13 naval guns worth $1 billion to India in the biggest defense deal between the two countries in 4 years. The guns will be manufactured by Minneapolis-based BAE Systems. All right, that's a wrap on this edition of All You Need to Know, but do stay tuned. There's a lot more coming up in just a short while. This is Bloomberg Quint.